into the snow. The wind swept across the frozen plains, carrying a bite that could pierce through even the thickest wool coats. Snow crunched underfoot as Ethan, the solitary rancher, adjusted his scarf and squinted against the white haze. Life on the outskirts of the village had taught him patience, vigilance, and an appreciation for silence. Yet, nothing could have prepared him for the knock at his cabin door that morning. Li Mei's small frame appeared against the swirling snow, her dark hair plastered against her pale cheeks. She hesitated, then spoke in a voice trembling with urgency. "Sir, my mother didn't come home last night." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Ethan's chest tighten. "Your mother?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but firm. He stepped aside to let her enter, noticing the girl's trembling fingers and the way her eyes darted nervously to the snow outside. The cabin, sparsely furnished yet warm, smelled faintly of pine and smoke. It was a haven for one, but now it felt crowded. Li Mei nodded, shivering. "Yes, Ying Yue. She hasn't answered her phone, and she didn't come back last night. I don't know where she went." Her words faltered, revealing the depth of her worry. Ethan's gaze softened, but a twinge of unease gripped him. He knew Ying Yue. Her presence had always been distant, guarded, but never absent without reason. Ethan reached for a coat, his mind already racing. "Tell me everything you saw last night," he said, leading her to the small stove where a pot of tea steamed quietly. Li Mei perched on a chair, recounting the previous evening's events. Her mother slipping out under the pretense of errands, whispers of a stranger in the village, and a sense of unease she could not shake. Each word etched tension deeper into the cabin's walls. As she spoke, Ethan's memories drifted, fleeting moments of Ying Yue in the village, her laughter soft and reserved, the way her eyes lingered just a second too long on him. Those memories carried warmth and guilt, reminders of a bond unspoken yet undeniable. He shook his head lightly, forcing focus back to the present. Li Mei's fear was immediate and real. He could not allow sentiment to cloud judgment. "The snow is thick today," Ethan said, more to himself than to Li Mei, scanning the white horizon visible through the frosted window. "If she's out there, we need to find her before it gets worse." Li Mei's hands gripped his sleeve, a silent plea mingled with hope. Ethan nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He fetched his boots and gloves, the cabin quiet except for the wind outside. Each sound, Li Mei's small exhale, the rattle of the door, the distant caw of a crow, felt magnified. The snow outside reflected the gray morning light, stretching endlessly, a landscape both beautiful and merciless. Ethan's experience on the ranch had taught him survival, but searching for a missing person in these conditions was a different challenge entirely. Before leaving, he knelt slightly, meeting Li Mei's anxious gaze. "Stay here. Keep the fire going. I'll bring her back." She nodded solemnly, but he caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. That doubt mirrored his own, trusting that the missing could be found, yet knowing the world often had other plans. Ethan stepped outside, the cold biting immediately. The wind tugged at his coat, snow clinging to his boots as he followed faint tracks leading away from the village. Each step seemed to amplify the silence, the vast whiteness making every sound feel closer, every shadow deeper. He moved cautiously, aware of the dangers of the snow and the unknown path ahead. The tracks led him to a cluster of bare trees, the forest's edge looming dark and silent. Ethan paused, listening. Somewhere ahead, a faint rustle hinted at life, or at least the presence of someone who should not be there. His heart thudded, a mix of fear and anticipation. The search had begun, but already he sensed that finding Ying Yue might uncover truths more complicated than mere absence. As he advanced into the snow, the sun struggling to pierce the gray sky, Ethan's mind churned with questions. Where had she gone, and why? The wind whipped around him, carrying both the scent of pine and the whisper of secrets yet to be revealed. One thing was certain. The day had begun with a knock, but it would not end quietly. And so, with snow rising around his boots and uncertainty weighing on his heart. Ethan ventured deeper into the frozen expanse, the promise of discovery and danger guiding each deliberate step. Shadows in the woods. The forest loomed ahead, its skeletal trees draped in heavy snow, their branches creaking under the weight. Ethan paused at the edge, scanning the scene. Faint footprints marred the otherwise pristine white, leading toward a dim flicker of light in the distance. His breath came in visible puffs, mingling with the cold, and each step forward was deliberate, cautious. The wilderness offered no forgiveness for mistakes, and every crunch of snow beneath his boots sounded unnervingly loud in the silent expanse. As he moved closer, Ethan's mind replayed Li Mei's worried face. The girl's trust weighed heavily on him, a quiet reminder that he was not just searching for a stranger, but for someone deeply entwined with his own unspoken past. Ying Yue, her name lingered like smoke. He recalled fleeting moments in the village, a subtle tilt of her head, a laugh shared too briefly, a glance that seemed meant only for him. Those memories both comforted and tormented him, a tangled mix of desire and guilt. A sudden movement caught his eye, a scarf snagged on a branch, crimson against the snow. He bent, brushing it free, noting the familiar scent of jasmine, Ying Yue's perfume. His pulse quickened. She had passed this way recently, but the scent also carried ambiguity, a hint of another presence, of someone else nearby. Ethan's instincts sharpened. This was no ordinary disappearance. He followed the footprints, careful to preserve their integrity as evidence. Each step deeper into the woods heightened both the cold and the tension. The forest seemed alive, shadows dancing in the diffused light, branches scratching against each other in whispered secrets. Ethan's mind traced possibilities, an accidental wander, a deliberate choice, or something more troubling. His experience as a rancher had taught him patience, observation, and caution, yet the unknown stretched before him like a taut rope ready to snap. The flicker of light grew stronger. Peering through the trees, Ethan caught sight of a small cabin, its smoke curling skyward in fragile tendrils. Windows frosted over, yet movement was discernible, silhouettes of figures shifting inside. A muffled voice floated through the wooden walls. Ying Yue's, though altered, strained, almost unrecognizable. And another voice, low and unfamiliar, threaded through the conversation. Ethan froze. Betrayal and concern collided in his chest. He crouched behind a snow-laden bush, listening. Words were fragmented, punctuated by laughter that did not belong to him. The tension coiled tightly in his stomach. The realization settled cold and sharp. Ying Yue had been keeping secrets. Someone else had entered her life, someone close enough to share hushed conversations in the dead of night. Ethan's mind flickered to Li Mei, to the innocent trust in her eyes, and he clenched his fists. Protecting the girl, he reminded himself, must come first, but the ache in his chest told a different story. The romantic pull he had long denied surged unexpectedly, raw and unrelenting. He remembered the afternoons when Ying Yue had visited the ranch, helping with chores yet lingering just long enough to catch his eye. Hands brushing over fences, soft laughter carried by wind, moments frozen in snow-dusted memory. And now, here she was, distant and entangled, a presence both desired and unreachable. Ethan inched closer, tracking the snowed-over trail to the cabin's side. Through a frosted window, he glimpsed the scarf from earlier wrapped around her shoulders, the silhouette of a man leaning close. Their conversation was intimate, tinged with laughter and unspoken familiarity. The sight hit Ethan harder than any physical blow could. He understood, with a mix of sorrow and bitter longing, that this moment would change everything. He stepped back, deciding against confrontation. Words could shatter fragile dynamics beyond repair, and Li Mei's trust depended on his restraint. Instead, he scanned the perimeter, noting an approach from the back. Small but significant details, the footprints, the shift in snow, the faint warmth of life in frozen surroundings. Observation, patience, and strategy became his allies, Confrontation would come later, if at all. As snow drifted silently around him, Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, a relic from years past when he chronicled observations of the land and its inhabitants. He jotted notes quickly: footprints, size, direction, approximated time of passage, the scent lingering in the cold air. Each notation tethered him to purpose, grounding him amid swirling uncertainty. Night approached. Shadows thickened, the wind's howl carrying an ominous undertone. Ethan knew he could not linger forever. The forest was unforgiving, and his responsibility extended beyond personal desire. Yet, even as he prepared to retreat for the evening, he glanced back at the cabin, the flickering light cutting through snow like a silent promise of revelation. Tonight had revealed both truth and temptation, sorrow and yearning. Ethan's path forward was uncertain, but one fact remained undeniable. The search for Ying Yue had become more than a simple rescue. It was now a confrontation with secrets, desire, and the fragile threads connecting him, Li Mei, and the woman he had long admired. The snow continued to fall, muffling his retreating steps as he returned to the village edge. Footprints faded behind him, merging into the white expanse, but the memory of the light, the laughter, and the scarf lingered vividly. Ethan knew that tomorrow he would venture further, compelled by both duty and a heart caught between longing and loyalty. And as the wind whipped through the barren trees, he felt the weight of consequences pressing close, a reminder that some truths, once glimpsed, could never be unseen. The hidden cabin. The wind had grown sharper by mid-afternoon, biting through the layers Ethan had piled on. Each step into the deeper woods was deliberate, measured, his boots sinking slightly into the soft snow. The cabin he had glimpsed the night before now loomed ahead, shrouded in shadow, a flickering light glinting behind frosted windows. Every instinct told him this was the threshold of truths long hidden. He crouched behind a thick pine, observing quietly. The muffled voices of Ying Yue and the man, unknown yet familiar in tone, drifted through the wooden walls. Ethan felt his chest tighten, a cocktail of longing, betrayal, and protective duty coiling inside him. He recalled Li Mei's worried expression, her small hands clutching at his sleeve, and reminded himself that he could not act recklessly. The silhouette of Ying Yue moved toward the doorway, the scarf he had seen yesterday wrapped delicately around her shoulders. Her movements were graceful, almost deliberate, as if hiding something from the world. The man followed closely, gesturing with quiet urgency, his shadow long across the snowed-over porch. Ethan's pulse quickened, not just from fear but from the ache of realization. She had chosen to meet him here, not out of malice, but perhaps curiosity, escape, or longing of her own. Memories surged unbidden. Their previous encounters in the village, brief touches while exchanging goods, quiet laughter shared over fences, lingering glances, played over his mind like flickering images. Each memory was a reminder of what could never be openly acknowledged. His affection for her had always been restrained, respectable, yet tonight the lines blurred under the weight of betrayal and desire. He edged closer, careful to avoid leaving traces in the fresh snow. Every footfall was calculated, the forest silence amplified even the smallest sound. Near the back of the cabin, he paused, crouching behind a stack of firewood. From this vantage, he could see the man handing Ying Yue a folded piece of paper. The gesture was intimate yet concealed, and Ethan's stomach knotted. The paper could contain explanations, confessions, or worse, an indication of her divided loyalties. Ethan's hands tightened around the leather-bound notebook he carried. Observation had become both shield and weapon. Words could wound, confrontations could fracture fragile trust, yet ignorance was no longer an option. He scribbled quick notes. Footprints leading here, time approximated, scarf's position, faint traces of perfume lingering in the cold air. Each detail tethered him to purpose, a thin line between chaos and control. Suddenly, the conversation within the cabin shifted. Ying Yue's voice, usually soft and measured, now carried tremors of emotion. Laughter mingled with tension, familiarity with caution. Ethan recognized subtle cues, a hand brushing against the man's sleeve, a shift in posture that betrayed comfort mingled with guilt. He felt the sting of longing, bitter and sharp, yet tempered by the responsibility he bore toward Li Mei. A movement near the window caught his eye. Ying Yue looked out, seemingly searching, her gaze scanning the snowy expanse. Ethan froze, recognizing the moment from their past. The fleeting eye contact, the unspoken questions lingering between them. He understood then that she had known someone watched her, that part of her had always sensed his presence, whether overt or hidden. Ethan debated confronting them. The rational part of him urged restraint. Let the moment pass, collect more information, protect Li Mei from harsh truths. The emotional part, ached with unsaid words and unfulfilled longing, pushed him toward action. Each breath in the icy air seemed to carry the weight of decision. He could step forward, demand answers, or retreat and preserve the delicate threads of respect and secrecy. Minutes stretched like hours as he remained hidden. The man eventually turned, leaving the cabin with careful steps, disappearing into the forest beyond. Ying Yue lingered at the door, her scarf fluttering slightly in the wind, then finally retreated inside. Ethan exhaled silently, a mixture of relief and melancholy washing over him. The confrontation had not yet occurred, but the truths were clearer than ever. She had chosen paths that intersected with others, paths that stirred desire, heartbreak, and moral conflict all at once. He stepped back, leaving careful tracks alongside the man's, retracing his path toward the village edge. The snow whispered beneath his boots, carrying away the evidence of his presence, while leaving the imprint of decisions made. He knew Li Mei awaited answers, yet he could not yet provide them. Some truths required patience, and some confessions demanded courage that would come later. As dusk fell, the forest transformed into a monochrome expanse, shadows deepening, the wind rising with the coming night. Ethan's resolve hardened. He would return, not as an intruder, but as an observer, protector, and perhaps, in time, a participant in the delicate web of human emotions unfolding before him. The line between duty and desire had blurred, and he understood that the path ahead was treacherous yet unavoidable. With one last glance toward the hidden cabin, Ethan melted into the snow-covered trees, leaving footprints that would soon be swallowed by the drifting white. The night promised both clarity and complications, and he carried with him the weight of secrets, longing, and a heart tethered to a woman who was both near and impossibly distant. Snowbound truths. Dawn crept over the snow-laden plains, painting the world in muted shades of white and gray. Ethan's boots crunched softly on the path back to the village, each step measured, careful. The night had left traces of uncertainty, yet clarity had begun to settle in his mind. He carried more than footprints and observations. He carried the weight of choices, longing, and the fragile threads that bound Li Mei, Ying Yue, and himself. Li Mei was waiting near the cabin, her small frame silhouetted against the smoky interior. The girl's dark hair hung damp from snow and wind, but her eyes were wide and alert. As Ethan approached, she looked up, relief flickering across her face. "Did you find her?" she asked, voice a mixture of hope and worry. Ethan knelt slightly to meet her gaze, careful to maintain distance, both physical and emotional. "She's safe," he said, the words measured yet firm. "But she's been carrying burdens, Li Mei. Things you and I might not fully understand." He gestured vaguely toward the snowy horizon. The girl nodded slowly, comprehension dawning despite her youth. There was an innocence in her concern, a trust placed upon him that he could not betray. Protecting her had become as crucial as any other responsibility. Inside the cabin, Ying Yue emerged from her room, wrapped in the familiar scarf that had marked her presence in the snow the previous night. Her eyes met Ethan's briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. No words were necessary. The moment carried the weight of secrets, longing, and respect. The flickering fire illuminated the room, casting shadows that danced across walls and floorboards, reflecting the tension that remained unresolved yet tempered by time and restraint. Ethan's gaze softened as he watched Ying Yue move to tend the small stove, the careful movements of someone balancing responsibility with the quiet ache of recent choices. He remembered the previous evening, the folded paper, the quiet conversation, the fleeting moments that had revealed both betrayal and desire. Yet now, standing across the room, the past's weight was tempered by the present's fragile peace. Li Mei's voice broke the silence, small yet steady. "Mother, why didn't you come home?" The question was simple, direct, but carried years of unspoken fear. Ying Yue paused, her fingers brushing over the kettle, then slowly turned. "I needed to understand myself," she said softly, voice tinged with regret. "Sometimes we walk paths we cannot explain, and those paths lead us back to the people we love, even when we falter." Her gaze softened toward Ethan, acknowledging a shared understanding, a connection forged in moments of uncertainty. Ethan nodded, understanding the delicacy of her words. He had witnessed the consequences of choices, the tug of desire and duty, and now saw a chance for resolution without destruction. There would be no confrontation here, only recognition. Sometimes love, unspoken or restrained, was expressed through patience and respect rather than immediate action. The snow outside began to fall again, soft and insistent, blanketing footprints and tracks alike. It was as if the world itself sought to cleanse the marks of the previous night, offering a fresh canvas for those willing to step lightly. Ethan felt the symbolism keenly. The snow mirrored the delicate balance between secrecy and revelation, desire and restraint. Li Mei stepped closer to her mother, tentatively reaching for her hand. Ying Yue allowed the gesture, the simple touch carrying forgiveness, understanding, and the unspoken acknowledgement of lessons learned. Ethan remained nearby, a silent guardian, understanding that his presence was both needed and peripheral. The emotional web was intricate, and each thread required careful tending. As the sun rose higher, the cabin seemed warmer despite the chill outside. The snow reflected light into the room, highlighting the quiet resilience of those within. Ying Yue returned to her chair by the stove, Li Mei seated beside her, and Ethan stepped back toward the door. A subtle nod passed between him and Ying Yue, a silent agreement that their connection remained, complex yet respected, while the immediate crisis had passed. The wind carried distant echoes across the plains, and Ethan lingered a moment longer, taking in the quiet. He understood that some truths could never be fully reconciled, some desires left unfulfilled. Yet within that tension lay beauty, the acknowledgement of imperfection, the careful stewardship of trust, and the fragile, unspoken bonds that tethered them together. With one final glance, Ethan stepped outside, snow crunching beneath his boots, footprints dissolving into the white expanse. The cabin receded into the background, warm light spilling from its windows, shadows flickering like memories. He walked away not in defeat, but in quiet triumph. He had safeguarded innocence, acknowledged longing, and preserved the delicate balance between love and discretion. The snow continued to fall, covering traces of the past, while leaving impressions of endurance, care, and restraint. Ethan's figure merged with the frozen landscape, a solitary guardian navigating the intersection of morality and desire. Somewhere inside, Ying Yue and Li Mei shared quiet warmth, aware that the night's revelations had tested them, but had also allowed them to survive, learn, and endure. And as the wind whispered through the snow-laden trees, the world seemed to pause, offering a moment of serenity, reflection, and the unspoken promise that life, with all its complexities, would continue.